Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. Now let's get into the story. Fiona Beaumont's husband and his 26-year-old girlfriend were slow dancing in the living room of a house that did not belong to either of them. While Fiona stood in the November sleet on the front steps of that same house, wearing a bathrobe and holding a cup of tea she had not yet taken a single sip of, watching them through the tall, frost-edged window like a stranger peering into someone else's warm life. She had been making tea when she found out. That was the part that stayed with her afterward, the absolute mundaneness of it. The kettle had just clicked off. The bergamot smell of the Earl Grey was rising from the mug. And then she had noticed the open laptop on the kitchen island, the email notification sitting right there on the screen, unread, from a Waterloo real estate firm. Subject line: Congratulations on your new purchase, 14 Ridgemont Court, Unit 9B. Fiona had never heard of 14 Ridgemont Court. She had never agreed to purchase anything on Ridgemont Court, but she recognized the bank account number referenced in the confirmation. It was their joint account, the one they had spent 4 years building. She had looked at the number again. $87,000. Gone. The sound that came out of Fiona's throat was not a scream. It was something quieter and far more dangerous, a single low exhale that cleared her lungs entirely, the way a person breathes before they go underwater for a very long time. She had walked into the living room with the laptop in her hands, her tea steaming gently on the counter behind her. Her husband, Colton Beaumont, was sitting in the leather armchair near the fireplace. He was 41 years old, a senior project director at a regional infrastructure firm in Kitchener, and he was currently wearing the particular expression he always wore when he believed he had already won an argument before it started. The faint, preemptive smirk of a man who has spent a decade practicing patience with someone he privately considered beneath him. Standing at the kitchen entrance, leaning against the doorframe with the comfort of someone entirely at home, was a young woman Fiona recognized. Her name was Zara Hollis. She was 26, a junior contracts coordinator at Colton's firm. She was also, Fiona understood now with a clarity that felt like cold water dropped directly onto the spine, the reason Colton had started working late on Tuesdays. Colton, Fiona said, keeping her voice so flat and level it frightened even her. What is 14 Ridgemont Court? Colton did not even glance at the laptop. He picked up his glass of bourbon, took a slow sip, and set it back down on the coaster with deliberate care. You weren't supposed to see that yet, he said. Yet, Fiona repeated. I was going to tell you after the holidays. He leaned back in the chair, crossing one leg over the other, with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and felt entirely prepared for it. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, Fiona. Things between us haven't been working for a long time. You know that. Zara said nothing. She examined her nails. You used our savings, Fiona said. $87,000. Half of that is my money. Half of it is mine. Colton set his glass down again. His voice dropped into the tone she privately called his boardroom voice. Measured, patient, laced with condescension, so thin it passed as reasonableness. You contribute to that account because I give you the space and the financial stability to work part-time at that Heritage Foundation. Let's not pretend the math is equal. I want that money back, Colton. He stood up then, slowly, and Fiona took a half step back without meaning to. He was not a violent man, not technically, not in the ways that left marks. But he was a large man who had learned very early that his size alone could do most of the work. You need to calm down, he said, walking toward her. You're embarrassing yourself. I want it back. Go take a walk, Colton said, and the gentleness in his voice was more frightening than anger would have been. He opened the front door. The sleet hit the porch stones with a thin, persistent hiss. Get some air. Come back when you can have a rational conversation. Colton. He placed one large hand against her shoulder and steered her forward, not roughly, not in any way a judge would consider assault, but with the absolute confidence of someone who has practiced the maneuver and knows exactly how much force is required. Fiona stepped onto the porch. She was still holding her tea. The door closed behind her. She heard the deadbolt turn. She stood there for a moment, the sleet collecting in her hair, the steam from the mug rising and dissolving into the cold air. Through the window, she watched Colton walk back to the fireplace. Zara appeared from the kitchen doorway, wrapped now in the throw blanket from the sectional sofa, the gray one Fiona had ordered from a shop in Halifax 2 Christmases ago. And Colton opened his arms, and she stepped into them, and he pressed his lips to her hair, and they began to move slowly in the orange light of the fire, easy and unhurried. as if the house were entirely theirs. Fiona took one sip of her tea. It had already gone lukewarm. Then she stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house to the driveway, where her car was parked. A sensible dark green Subaru that Colton had repeatedly suggested. She'd trade in for something newer, something that suited the neighborhood better, something he didn't have to feel self-conscious about when his colleagues visited. She had kept it anyway. She got in. She shut the door. The sleet drummed against the roof. She sat in the dark for a long moment, and then she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out her phone. To understand what happened next, you need to understand something about Fiona Elspeth Beaumont, née Fiona Elspeth Hartley Drummond, that Colton had never bothered to learn, because Colton had never believed there was anything about Fiona worth the effort of learning. She was 38 years old. She had a quiet voice, and a preference for understated clothes, and a habit of deflecting compliments that Colton had reframed in his own mind as evidence of low self-worth. She worked 4 days a week as a grants manager at the Drummond Heritage Foundation in Waterloo, a position she had held for 6 years. She made a modest salary. She drove a practical car. She cooked Sunday dinners from scratch and kept a kitchen garden in the backyard, and went to bed early with library books. Colton believed all of this meant she needed him. What Colton did not know, what Fiona had chosen, with great care and for reasons rooted in a specific and formative experience of watching money destroy the people she loved most, never to disclose, was that the Drummond Heritage Foundation was not a regional charity. It was the philanthropic arm of Drummond Capital Holdings, a private investment conglomerate that her maternal grandmother had built from a single manufacturing plant in Brantford, Ontario, into a quietly enormous enterprise with interests in commercial real estate, natural resources, and institutional finance across 4 provinces. Fiona was not the grants manager of the Drummond Foundation. She was, in the legal and operational sense, its sole beneficiary and silent principal. She had been since her 35th birthday, when her grandmother, the precise, magnificent, terrifying Agnes Drummond, had transferred oversight to her in a ceremony so quiet and so private that it had been attended by exactly 3 people, one of whom was a tax lawyer and one of whom was a notary. The house on Fenwick Crescent, the one Colton had locked her out of on a sleeting Tuesday night, was held in the name of Drummond Property Trust. Colton had not bought it. He had not qualified for the mortgage he believed he held. He had been, for the past 3 years, submitting monthly payments to a financial services company that existed, on paper, as a subsidiary of a firm that reported, ultimately, to Fiona. Every payment had gone into a trust account for the Waterloo Children's Hospital Foundation. Fiona scrolled past her usual contacts. She found the name that she was looking for and pressed call. It rang once. Fiona. The voice was calm, unhurried, and sharp as a letter opener. It belonged to Harriet Nwachukwu, 71 years old, retired Deputy Attorney General of Ontario, and the Drummond family's principal legal advisor for the past 30 years. Harriet did not use pleasantries after 9 p.m. She considered them inefficient. Harriet, Fiona said. Her voice had changed. The soft cadence she used at dinner parties and grant meetings and Sunday morning farmers markets had dropped away entirely, and what replaced it was something quieter and considerably more precise. I need to talk to you about Colton. A brief silence. Then the sound of a chair adjusting. Tell me, Harriet said. Fiona told her. The $87,000. The condo on Ridgemont Court. Zara Hollis. The hand on the shoulder. The deadbolt turning. When she finished, Harriet said nothing for 4 seconds. Fiona counted. He is currently in the Fenwick Crescent property? Harriet asked. Yes. With the Hollis woman. Yes. And he put his hands on you. Technically. Fiona. He steered me out the door. Another silence. When Harriet spoke again, her voice had the particular quality of someone calmly selecting a tool from a well-organized drawer. All right, Harriet said. What would you like? Fiona looked through the rain-streaked windshield at the warm windows of the house. Inside, the fire was still going. She could see the faint orange flicker even from the driveway. I want it undone, Fiona said. All of it. I want him to understand, specifically and in detail, that he has spent 3 years living in a house that was never his, with money that was never his, in a life that was assembled and maintained entirely by someone he spent those 3 years treating like a dependent. Harriet made a sound that, from anyone else, might have been a laugh. The condo purchase, Fiona continued. He used joint funds. That means he used my funds. I want that transaction flagged and reviewed, and I want his firm to know what he did. His employer. He processed the wire transfer from his work laptop. I saw the routing in the email header. He used the company VPN. A pause during which Fiona could hear Harriet beginning to type. That's a violation of his employment contract at minimum, Harriet said. Possibly more, depending on where the funds originated. Does he have discretionary authority over client accounts? He signs off on subcontractor payments. Fiona heard the typing accelerate. I'll have our forensic accounting team begin a full review tonight, Harriet said. If there is anything else in those accounts that doesn't belong to him, we will find it. What about the property? Fenwick Crescent is under Drummond Trust. I know that. I drafted the lease agreement. A pause. You want them removed? I want it done properly, Fiona said. Documented. Legal. I don't want him to be able to claim anything was irregular. It won't be, Harriet said. I'll have an emergency eviction application ready for a justice of the peace within the hour. He is in fraudulent tenancy. She has no legal standing on the property whatsoever. I can also freeze the joint account pending the fraud review, which will include the $87,000 and any other unauthorized withdrawals for the past 18 months. Do it, Fiona said. There is one more thing, Harriet said, and her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, exactly, but more deliberate. His career at that firm. I want to be clear about what you're asking. I know what I'm asking. His employers will not have a choice if there is evidence of financial misconduct. They will have to act. He will not be able to work in project management in this province again. He put our savings into a condo for his girlfriend, Fiona said. He pushed me out the door in sleet and locked the deadbolt. And then he slow danced in my living room. She paused. Yes, Harriet, I know what I'm asking. A brief silence. Stay in the car, Harriet said. Keep the engine running. I'll have a car with 2 of our security people at the end of your street within 20 minutes. You are not to go back inside under any circumstances until this is processed. I'm not going back inside, Fiona said. I want to watch. A pause. All right, Harriet said. Give me 90 minutes. The line went quiet. Fiona set the phone on the passenger seat. She adjusted the heat. She looked at the house. Then she counted backward from 10. At 3, the lights went out. Not the street lights. Those stayed on, steady and indifferent, casting their orange glow on the wet pavement. Not the houses on either side of Fenwick Crescent. Just the house in front of her. The warm orange flicker of the fireplace disappeared last, because the gas line had been routed through the same smart home system that Colton had installed 2 winters ago and been enormously proud of. It had taken Harriet's technical team 4 minutes to access the grid account, because Colton had registered it using the same password he used for everything. His university rugby jersey number, followed by his graduation year. Inside the house, Fiona heard nothing for a moment. Then she saw the thin beam of a phone. Flashlight cut through the darkness of the living room. She watched Colton's silhouette move to the electrical panel in the mudroom. She knew the layout of that house completely. She had chosen every room in it. He would find nothing wrong with the breakers. He would try the backup system next. The generator unit installed along the east wall of the garage. He would not be able to activate it manually because the fuel valve had been closed remotely 40 seconds ago. He would try his phone. His personal cell would show no signal because the account had been suspended pending the fraud review. A standard protective measure Drummond's telecom subsidiary had implemented automatically when Harriet filed the initial flagging order. He would have his work phone, though. That one ran on a separate satellite network for field contractors. Fiona knew about it. She had let Harriet know about it, too. It took 12 minutes before she saw the light in the upstairs study window. Faint and blue-white, the glow of a laptop screen connected through a mobile hotspot. Fiona knew exactly what Colton was looking at, because she had spent enough years watching him to know the precise sequence. Bank account first, then investment portfolio, then the offshore account he believed she knew nothing about. The one he'd opened 18 months ago, through a numbered company registered in Alberta, into which he had been quietly redirecting $3,000 to $5,000 a month from the subcontractor payment pool at his firm. That last account had been Harriet's particular focus. The forensic team had found it in under an hour. At 1:47 in the morning, the porch light flickered on. The front door opened. Colton stepped out onto the steps in his socked feet, holding his phone flashlight. He swept the beam across the porch, across the hedges, across the front walk. He was looking for her. Fiona could see the particular set of his jaw even from the car. The expression he wore when something was not cooperating, when the world was failing to behave as he had organized it to behave. He saw the Subaru, He stood on the steps for a moment, looking at it. She could see the moment he decided what it meant, the tight, contemptuous flicker across his face. She knew that expression, too. It was the expression that had accompanied 10 years' worth of sentences that began with "you always," or "you never," or "I don't know why I bother explaining this to you." He went back inside. The door shut. The deadbolt clicked. Fiona exhaled slowly and looked at the clock on the dashboard. At 2:23 a.m., two dark SUVs turned onto Fenwick Crescent and parked along the curb, engines idling. 4 people in dark jackets got out, not police, though one of them had spent 20 years as an OPP investigator before joining Drummond's security team. One of them was carrying a large waterproof envelope. Fiona watched them walk to the front door. The knock was 3 deliberate strikes, the kind that don't leave room for pretending you didn't hear. Through the living room window, she saw Colton's flashlight beam lurch and then go still, then begin moving fast toward the front of the house. She heard his voice, muffled through the glass and the sleet. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the tone. She had heard that tone in meetings, where someone had raised an objection he hadn't anticipated. She had heard it at dinner parties, when a guest said something that contradicted him. The voice of a man who is angry because the room is not responding correctly. The door opened. One of the 4, a woman in her 50s named Adesola, who had a law degree from Osgood and delivered documents with the mild efficiency of someone confirming a dental appointment, held out the waterproof envelope. Fiona had asked Harriet to have someone relay what happened at the door. She got a text message 7 minutes later, written in Harriet's characteristically spare style. He denied owning any offshore accounts. We showed him the transaction records. He tried to close the door. Adesola put her foot in it. He's been served. Eviction order signed by JP at 2:11. He has until 6 a.m. Hollis woman came downstairs and was informed she has no tenancy status and is considered an unauthorized occupant. She is not taking it well. He is not taking it well either. A second message followed 30 seconds later. His firm's HR director has been notified. They are treating it as an emergency disclosure, given the client fund exposure. He won't be going back to that office. Fiona set the phone down on her lap. She thought about the $87,000. She thought about the Tuesday evenings and the boardroom voice and the hand against her shoulder, precise and patient and entirely confident in its own impunity. She thought about 10 years of being told, in 100 small ways, that her presence in their shared life was a kind of charity he was providing. He thought about her grandmother Agnes, who had built something lasting and private and enormous, and had never once felt the need to announce it to anyone. At 4:58 in the morning, the front door of the house on Fenwick Crescent opened again. Colton came out first. He was wearing his coat over his pajamas, carrying a single bag, the regulation 1 bag of personal items Adesola had specified. His face, in the thin gray light before dawn, looked like a man who had driven confidently onto a highway and found that the road simply ended. Zara came out behind him. She was wearing her own coat now, her arms crossed tightly against the cold, her expression cycling rapidly between fury and something closer to genuine fear. She had been up since 2 a.m., learning in installments that her bank accounts had been frozen pending the fraud investigation, that her employment at Colton's firm had been suspended, and that the condo on Ridgemont Court, the one Colton had told her was a fresh start for both of them, was currently the subject of a financial recovery order. They stood on the porch steps together for a moment, not touching, and Fiona watched something shift between them. The specific gravity of 2 people realizing that the story they had told themselves about each other is no longer structurally sound. Zara said something to Colton. Colton said something back. Zara shook her head and walked away from him down the front path, pulling out her phone and opening a rideshare app, not looking back. Colton stood alone on the steps. He looked at the Subaru. He picked up his bag and walked toward it. Fiona watched him come. She watched the way he walked, still straight, still deliberate, still holding on to the posture of a man who was managing a situation rather than being undone by one. It took more effort than it used to. She could see that. The effort was visible now. He stopped at the passenger window. Fiona lowered it. The sleet had stopped sometime in the past hour, and the air was very still. The sky in the east was beginning to lighten at the edges, a pale gray blue, the specific color of early winter mornings in southern Ontario, that always reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. Colton looked at her. Whatever speech he had prepared somewhere between the doorstep and the car, he didn't deliver it. He just looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, open and exhausted and stripped of its usual careful arrangement, and said, "I don't understand what just happened." "I know," Fiona said. "The house was never yours, Colton. It was held in trust in my name. The mortgage account you've been paying into for 3 years goes to a children's hospital fund." He stared at her. "The firm," he said. "Apex, my firm. They found the subcontractor accounts," Fiona said. "Harriet's team flagged everything and passed it to HR 6 hours ago. I imagine there's a more formal conversation coming from them." Colton's jaw moved once, without producing sound. "I don't have anywhere to go," he said finally. His voice was quiet. There was no boardroom tone left in it. "My accounts are frozen. I don't even have enough to get a hotel room tonight." Fiona looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the kettle clicking off, the bergamot smell of the tea, the email on the open laptop. "You told me I needed to go outside and get some perspective," she said. "I think you should try it." She pressed the button to raise the window. Colton didn't move immediately. He stood there in the pre-dawn stillness of Fenwick Crescent, his single bag at his feet, watching the dark green Subaru's taillights come on. Steady and unhurried, as Fiona pulled away from the curb and drove south down the quiet street without looking back. She had one appointment that morning, at 9 a.m., a call with the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation to finalize the annual grant disbursements. She had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. She had notes. She had numbers. She had, as she always had, done the work. She drove toward the highway. The sky continued to lighten. The first real light of the morning came up across the flat, frost-edged fields east of the city. And Fiona Beaumont drove into it with both hands steady on the wheel, looking very much like a woman who had always known exactly where she was going, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to go.